The Leader of the House with papers. No papers. I've received a letter from the honourable member for Grayndler proposing that a definite matter of public importance be submitted to the House for discussion, namely the government's failure to invest in productivity-boosting infrastructure, and I call upon all those honourable members who approve of the proposed discussion to rise in their places, and I call the member for Grayndler.
Mr Speaker, one of the advantages of being in government is that you do have access to the ideas of some pretty smart people.
Thanks, mate.
And the government should start to listen to them, because last Friday the Reserve Bank Governor, Philip Lowe, had this to say: "I have been saying this for some years now. With interest rates so low right around the world, including here, we've been trying to induce households to spend money through lower interest rates. It would be a better strategy to create new assets rather than current consumption. The best new assets to create in our country at the moment are infrastructure assets, particularly in transportation networks." Now, that follows similar comments from Glenn Stevens. It follows his predecessor. It follows the comments last week from the former Secretary of the Treasury, Ken Henry, who said this: "We do not have the infrastructure capacity to support today's population, far less the population of the future." But what we have from this government is that in its first 2 years we saw a 20% decline in public sector infrastructure investment. For each of the current government's 12 quarters that they have been in office, every single one of them has had less public sector infrastructure investment than all 21 quarters when we were in government, from the time of our first budget in the June 2008 quarter right through to September 2013. When we came to office in 2007, we were ranked 20th in the OECD for investment in infrastructure as a proportion of GDP. When we left office, we were ranked first, number one. We're not anymore. What we see from this government, is policy failure, and it's policy failure based upon ideology. Policy failure based upon the fact that when they came to office, they made a decision to stop all public transport infrastructure investment. Money that was in the budget for the Cross River Rail in Brisbane, money that was in the budget for the Melbourne Metro, money that was in the budget for the Gawler Line electrification in Adelaide, and money that was in the budget for public transport in Perth. And if you want an example of the government's infrastructure failure, you can have a look at the difference between their rhetoric and the reality. Minister after minister will use this fantasy figure of $50 billion infrastructure plan. It's a nonsense. The budget papers show that the figure is $34 billion up to the year 2019-20, and then $8 billion right into the future at some unspecified time. They are simply making it up as it goes along. And indeed, they don't even invest what they say they will do. In that 2014 budget, where they had an undertaking to invest $8 billion in the last financial year, 2015-16, the actual final budget outcome for investment was $5.5 billion. Now, in the face of all these facts, what we have is Orwellian propaganda. During the last election campaign, in the lead-up to it in the first half of last year, they actually cut the infrastructure budget to fund infrastructure ads on TV, some $18 million. And that's why they have no plan for productivity, no plan for traffic congestion, no plan for housing affordability. And the examples are there. The East-West Link, of course, in Victoria, 45 cents for every dollar invested. I mean, if anyone over there wants to give me $100, I'll give them back $45 next time I see them, and we'll call it a good deal. That's the way that they see investment in infrastructure. Of course, WestConnex in Sydney, the tunnel that has begun, they don't quite know where it's coming up. And last week, residents in my electorate got told that it was a good idea to have a construction site virtually on the grounds of Leichhardt High School. They wouldn't do it at Newington, they wouldn't do it at the Trinity Grammar, but a local public high school, fair game, doesn't matter. And in the letter that went to residents, they actually said that they were still working out the final route. They've begun the project, they've begun the tunnel, they just don't know where it's coming out. An example of failure from this government. But they've learnt nothing. Because the Perth Freight Link, they are committing the same mistake over and over again. Pulled out of a Wheaties box in the 2014 budget. At the time, the WA Parliamentary Secretary for Transport, Jim Chown, this is what he told a parliamentary committee. At this, and I quote, "At this stage we have not actually got plans that are worthy of public scrutiny." All those years later, we still don't have a plan that's worthy of public scrutiny. And we asked in this parliament of the Prime Minister, who flicked it to his minister, what about the 3 kilometres in between where the road stops and where the port actually is? See, a port is actually on the waterfront. You can't move the port, you've got to put the road to the port, but it stops 3 kilometres short. And the minister didn't even know that that was the case, and the Prime Minister didn't know. And when he went to Perth on his one visit of this campaign, he won't be back there again, I'm sure, he still didn't know. And he said, oh, well, there'll be another final stage. But we asked, of course, in Senate estimates this week about this so-called final stage. And, of course, they said they have not received anything, any information about it. This is Mr Roland Pittard of the Infrastructure Department. This is what he said. We have not seen a draft project proposal report for that. Literally making it up as they go along. But it's worse, because this dud proposal, they are saying that if Labor is elected on March 11, and be very clear, Mark McGowan has a mandate to not proceed with the Perth Freight Link, to instead fund Perth Metronet and a range of road projects that actually are ready to go, that will improve road safety, that will improve productivity, and that will go to an end point. What he has said is they'll hold over that $1.2 billion. Just like they're treating the people of Victoria with contempt, which is receiving 7.7% of the national infrastructure spend, with 1 in 4 Australians, the fastest growing state in Australia, with the fastest growing city of Melbourne in Australia. They will hold the people of Western Australia to ransom. And it stands in stark contrast with what we did in government. Gateway WA, Perth City Link, the Swan Valley Bypass, the Tonkin Highway, the Leach Highway, the Great Northern Highway, the North West Coastal Highway, Esperance Port, the upgrade to the Transcontinental Railway, the upgrade of the state's grain rail network, contribution of $135 million. And then this mob's idea of a project is either to go and try and open a project so they have something to do with it, or sometimes they're quite creative. They change the name and pretend it's a new project. A new name isn't a new project. The Swan Valley Bypass is the same as Northlink and was funded by us. The fact is that we look forward on this side of the House to working with a Labor government in WA to invest in infrastructure, support jobs and support productivity.